Welcome back to the Soft Edges podcast. I am your host, Lucy, and I am joined today by my wonderful co-host, Mais Rukel. How are you doing today, Mais?
Hi, Lucy. I'm doing good. I'm really excited about the parts of the Pleasure Activism we will discuss today. Most of it is filled with love and cozy appreciation for loved ones and mentors. And I'm just feeling it.
Yeah, me too. I really had fun with these few chapters that we're going to tackle. I'm very excited too.
Yeah.
All right. So if you are new here, we're very happy to have you with us today. And if you are joining us again, thank you so much for coming back. Today we are continuing our journey through the amazing book Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good, written by the wonderful Adrienne Maree Brown. In this episode, we will be diving into 3 different chapters between page 53 and page 80 of the book, if you would like to follow along with us. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Loves it.
So the first chapter we are going to talk about today is called A Spoilerific Gush on How Octavia Butler Turns Me On, which is written by Adrienne Maree Brown. The very first sentence of this chapter is, quote, "I once sat on Octavia Butler's face," end quote.
Yes.
And I love that. I think that it's such a cheeky and smart choice of words.
It's so funny.
I think it really sets the tone super well for this
Absolutely.
chapter. And so in this chapter, Adrienne Maree Brown, she proceeds to quite literally gush over Butler's work in order to introduce us to her and her unique universe. Now, for those of you who do not know who Octavia Butler is and her body of work, she is a Black science fiction writer who wrote a great number of wonderful books, such as the Patternist series, which includes books like Pattern Master and Clay's Ark, and the Parable series, which includes Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, among many other book series, novels, and short story collections. I myself haven't read a book of hers as of yet, but that's something that I would love to do soon. However, I know for a fact that you, my lovely co-host, Mais Rukel, is a huge fan of Octavia Butler. Am I correct?
Yes, that's true. I met Octavia Butler through Adrienne Maree Brown also, though. The first time I've read about her was in Pleasure Activism in 2019.
Ooh.
And when Brown and Toshi Regan began their podcast, Octavia's Parables, that was when I bought a copy of The Parable of the Sower and The Parable of the Talents. And it's beautiful writing. It's filled with exciting, original, creative substance.
Whoa.
Filled with lots of insight on humanity and carefully embedded in the situations she constructs. And both books were incredible, really. And thanks to The Parable of the Sower, my favorite trio of characters that include a Harry in it successfully changed to Harry, Lauren, and Zahra from that book, from Harry, Ron, and Hermione.
Yes, replacement.
And recently I also finished the graphic novel adaptation of Parable of the Sower by Damien Duffy and John Jennings, and that was also really well done. I loved it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. What would you say was your favorite aspect of Octavia Butler's writing?
I mean, her body of work is so worthy of diving deep into it, and Adrienne Maree Brown did such a good job providing us a clear picture of Butler's work in true Virgo style in such detail. Well, Butler held nothing back while investigating all kinds of intimacy, sex and pleasure, but also a lot of take on politics and how we treat each other and issues of racism and sexism and all of it. It's just always together in it. One interesting detail I remember from Parable of the Sower is, and by the way, this might be a bit of a spoiler for some. For me, I don't really think it's a spoiler, but I won't really go into details. But feel free to skip a bit ahead. I'm waiting.
Spoiler alert.
3, 2, 1. Yes. The main character, Lauren, has a condition called hyperempathy, but this information you can already find in the synopsis of the book, which makes her feel other people's physical pain as if it's her own. But it also allows her to share someone's pleasure during sex as well. And this is good in some cases, and in others it isn't. All right, so potential spoiler ends here. But I just think that the way she handles the ways we can initiate and practice intimacy and sex in very positive ways, but also in very dark ways as well. That approach felt very unique from Butler when I read the two books. And it felt amazing how bold and daring she was.
Yeah.
And the way sometimes the way she mentioned an assault or a very violent situation so flat that you felt like, yeah, this is what that world has become. These things are just mentioned very flatly because that's like part of a daily practice in that environment. Like, she's really able to convey that feeling. It's wonderful. And Brown and Regan, in their podcasts, I really recommend listening to it as well, Octavia's Parables. The way they talk about it, also listening to it, is just wonderful. They have been discussing Parable of the Sower, chapter by chapter, really carefully and in detail, and with many questions that leave you pondering in delight, or sometimes in a bit of a sadness or anxiety, depending on the context, but always with the feeling that, like, there are so many great people who care about these questions and the answers we hope to find for them.
Yeah, wow.
I just love this. I'm so thankful for Brown for pulling me into this world of Butler.
Damn. That's a really cool thing that she that there's a podcast around Butler's work.
Oh yeah. That's
a great way also to be introduced to her work, I feel. I think I'm going to listen to it at some point, for sure.
Definitely. I really recommend reading along, actually.
Yeah. Actually, I bought the ebook version of Parables of the Sower, but I also realized that I hate reading books on my computer. I don't know why. It doesn't make sense. It's not that huge of a difference, but I just prefer having the physical copy. So I haven't read through everything. I did go through a little bit of it, but I think I'm going to buy a physical copy and finally dive into it, and maybe even follow with the podcast you talked about.
Wonderful. Looking forward to discuss it with you. And I'm right there with you, because I always also prefer a physical copy of a book much more.
Yes.
You can't just curl up with a tablet, or can you? Maybe others do, but it just doesn't feel that's the same to me.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, I guess I could read it on a fucking tablet, but that's just not my style. I'm old school or whatever.
Yeah.
I like paper.
Yes. Same.
Wonderful. So going back to the book, into this wonderful chapter, in it, basically, as we already touched on a little bit, Adrienne Maree Brown basically talks about how Butler managed to beautifully navigate the many complexities of topics such as relationships and love and sex and gender, family, community, in the different worlds and through the various characters that she created in her books, right?
Yeah.
And to me, from the description that I got from Adrienne Maree Brown and your description now, I feel like there's almost a boundaryless feel in the exploration and experimentation that she engages with, which feels quite innovative and fearless and shameless all at once. Yeah, and I really like that.
Me too.
In a lot of ways, Butler pushes the limits of what we're taught, what we tolerate, what we're used to as a society by switching and mixing the gender roles, for example, in relationships and sex, or introducing interspecies sex and shape-shifting, diving into multiplicity in love, what could be considered shocking age gaps. I put shocking in little, whatever.
Yeah.
But there are, of course, certain points that I'd love to bring forward. But right before I dive into them, I'm actually super curious about what caught your attention in this chapter, Maya, since you already know a lot of Octavia Butler's work.
Reading it a second time was very interesting for me, this chapter, because now I'm much more acquainted with the work of Butler. This time it felt more like as if I was in a discussion around them with Brown, and thinking like, oh yeah, exactly, definitely. It just reminded me a lot from Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, of course, that she mentioned. But the interesting thing was, for me, the first time I read this chapter in 2019 was the part about interspecies sex, and I was suddenly like, huh? What? And then and then I found out that it mostly meant with aliens by interspecies, and also when it involves an animal, then that involved shape-shifting. So a character turning into a dolphin to make love with a dolphin, or turning into an eagle, leopard, wolf, and such. And then I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting take because, of course, to most people, I think it could be shocking to see the words interspecies and sex together. But I find it really interesting that in her works, Octavia Butler completely pushes the boundaries and actually makes us humans also animals by allowing us to shapeshift. And I find that pretty cool. That's something that really caught my attention.
Exactly. And considering what I read so far from Butler's work is that this detachment from human body is also very interesting. But I won't spoil so much for you.
Oh yeah, we should have put a spoiler alert at the beginning of the episode as well.
No, that's true. But body is really one of the things that is at the center of Butler's work. Body and what it brings and what it entails in a social system, in a racialized system. So that's very interesting. When she gives her characters this freedom to shapeshift into different bodies, that already carries something in it.
Yeah, that's so cool. It does give a lot more freedom, a lot more possibilities. It's really about who you embody rather than who your body is, I feel, if that makes sense. To me, that there's a nuance there. And I think this way of considering life and the possibilities and the powers within us is completely outstanding. I love that it takes us to a completely different world immediately, and yet it's so many metaphors at once for what we can see and experience in our lives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Love that.
Love that too. Something that really caught my attention as well is the section called Male Bodies in Receptive Mode, in which Adrienne Maree Brown points out how Octavia Butler completely switches the gender roles around in some of her work, putting, for example, the male bodies in the position in which our society, in reality, puts the female bodies. For example, and I'd like to read a quote from the book for you guys to understand a little bit better. Let me find the page. It's on page 55 for those of you who are following along. She says, quote, "In a different way, in both the Lilith's Brood and Xenogenesis series, men are part of a sexual encounter in which they play the same role as women. They are pleasured while something is extracted from their bodies, sperm or egg." End quote. And I find it super interesting that Butler consciously chooses to switch up the roles and put the male bodies in a more vulnerable position, a position in which something is being taken from them, because the way I see it, it is a chilling yet brutally honest metaphor for women's place and condition in a man-focused, man-powered, man-controlled world, especially when it comes to women's bodies. And for example, in our Western society, since freaking forever, women, particularly Black, Indigenous women of color, have been used and abused physically, mentally, and emotionally by men. So I really found that kind of upside down switch to be really touching in a lot of ways, really confronting too. And I just wondered how it resonated with you, for example.
Yeah, I'm really curious about these works from Butler that is mentioned in this quote you just read. Can't wait to read them, seriously. I have a couple books that I want to finish first, but I will get back to discovering Butler's work further. But already from Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, you see the way she plays with how these bodies, perceived as male or female, differ in terms of privilege as well. She definitely plays with that. And when a character pretends to be another gender, changes their appearance to fit the way society sees the other gender, you see the privilege that brings in that context. And it underlines how passing as normal or as the privileged can be a matter of survival in a society.
She does it really well, and I think it's pretty brave. It's pretty badass to do something like that and to really play with these gender roles and include privilege in it, and really, it's pretty well-rounded, her approach. I feel it's not something that's superficial. It really goes in depth.
Exactly, she's a great observer.
You can feel that even coming from someone who hasn't read her books yet. I can feel that.
Yeah. She describes herself as always an outsider, and sometimes you feel it in her writing, how she has been observing a lot and has been analyzing a lot.
Yeah.
In the depths that she puts into specific situations, you really see that kind of a person is behind that text.
That's really cool. I'm so looking forward to diving deeper into her work.
Yes, I'm looking forward for you to discover her work.
Yes.
Really, I'm really excited.
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me fucking revolutionary, honestly.
Yes, it really is.
Yeah, when I reread this chapter that we are studying now, I was like, wow, like I really, really want to read her books.
Yes.
I really want to. And I think she should be part of like the educative program at school.
Yeah.
I think that would be so interesting to have her as a literary study instead of other writers that are super white, super man and super, you know what I mean?
Exactly, I agree. She should really be included in many more curriculums, like in Rietveld also.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, in theory class, people should discuss Octavia Butler's work, I think.
Yeah.
But there are also quite academic environments that discern and analyze and theorize Butler's work. And I love that too.
I can imagine, but I definitely know that in the, how do you say, high school, middle school, those kind of school years, at least from my personal experience, I never had the opportunity to study such a body of work and such a writer.
Yeah. We always had like the classics, they call, is so white.
Exactly.
It's so white. So white and so male, always.
So white and male, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's just like, okay, like we get it.
Yeah.
Can we move on? Can we study other people? There's space for everyone. Can we just get rid of that for a while and focus on other writers of color, women writers?
Yes. And people are surprised when they're like, oh, our children don't like reading. Yeah, because you've been pushing really boring books to them.
It's boring as fuck.
Stop it.
Why are you shocked?
Exactly.
Let's start a literary revolution for high schoolers and middle schoolers.
Yes.
They deserve it. I think the younger you educate them in that way, the better it'll be when they grow up.
We for sure need this movement.
But going back to the book, another thing that I wanted to bring forward is Adrienne Maree Brown's reflection about the impact of Octavia Butler's work in her own mindset and her personal experiences. In the section Symbiotic Sexual Experiences and Communities, she talks about how Octavia Butler has some of her characters engage in romantic and or sexual relationships based on multiplicity and community, allowing these characters, to thrive more than ever, which is something that I think we can relate to what we know as, for example, among many others, polyamorous relationships or ethical non-monogamy, just to name a couple. Of course, there are many other forms of relationships that are based on multiplicity. And these relationships, they're not new concepts, you know what I mean? They have existed for many centuries, not only in our society, but in many other communities and cultures. And yet I feel like even nowadays, even right now, as we're recording, we're in 2020, people who consciously choose to engage in such relations are still being shamed or considered atypical or
their relationships aren't valid.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a shame, because I'd like to share another quote from Adrienne Maree Brown, which is on page 56 this time. She says, quote, "I think so many of us would be nourished by the sort of symbiotic communities that Octavia envisioned, where connection wasn't necessarily based on visual attraction, but other kinds of longing and need, where being attracted to someone wasn't the first step of a path toward a singular ownership, but could be a move into community and a future," end quote.
I love this.
I love this too. I think she's so right.
Yeah.
It is so true. Why don't we value these kinds of relationship as much as we value heteronormative relationships? You know what I mean? Like a man and a woman getting married and spending the rest of their lives together. That's what our society puts as like the end goal. Spoiler, it's not. And I completely feel like this would be so beneficial to all of us, to open our minds. And it doesn't mean that everybody should engage in these forms of relationships. You can do whatever feels right to you, but I do feel like it would make this world so much better if these relationships were just considered and valued and accepted and acknowledged, and not completely denied and quieted.
I agree. We all have so much to unlearn.
Yeah.
The way love functions has always shown to us with very heteropatriarchal examples, right? I mean, as a queer kid, for example, there was a time in my life where I thought love just wasn't a possibility for me because I've never seen a model of it that reflected how I would like to engage in it and with the kind of people that I would like to engage with. So, yeah, there's so much to unlearn, so much to unpack, and then rebuild again, right? But it's really worthy, I think. Definitely agree.
I agree completely.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's move on to the next chapter we're tackling this episode. It is called Love as Political Resistance. Great title. Love that. In this chapter, Adrienne Maree Brown challenges the practices and the habits of love that we're used to as a society, based on her learnings from Audre Lorde and Octavia Butler, of course. Mm-hmm. I found the way that she started this chapter super powerful. She says, quote, Audre Lorde taught us that caring for ourselves is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare.
Yes. And this directly connects to pleasure activism. And again, also, it connects, for me, to the work of Trisha Hersey again, of the NAP ministry that I mentioned in the first episode as well. Because Hersey often says that rest is resistance because it disrupts the grind culture. So imagine literally laying your ass down disrupts this grinding machine that treats you like a source of raw energy to mine or extract from. And when we refuse to engage, when we refuse the pain and we say, hey, look, we deserve better and we demand better. We deserve and demand to feel good in every single context we find ourselves in. That literally becomes resistance against the system that constantly works towards your harm.
Yes, completely.
And then it is political warfare, of course, because you're literally saying, okay, if you want me to accept harm as it is, that's not going to happen. Then we're in a political warfare with you because I want to self-preserve. I want to self-pleasure. I want to feel good. I deserve better. I demand better.
Fuck yeah. And I love that this is introduced as almost a rebellious act. It is a rebellious act, I think, to engage in those practices and go against the grain completely and against what we have been taught and what we are being told to do and how to live our lives. Like, no, that's over. We're done with that.
Yeah. And of course, it takes a lot of privilege, right? To be able to say, like, no, hell no, I'm not taking a 9-to-5 job. To be able to say that takes a lot of privilege. But once you have that much privilege and once you are able to say, like, no, this is not how I will navigate in life. There are other things that I like to do that give me much more pleasure and the means of living. That's already a resistance towards that system that demands your underpaid enslavement.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think it is good to acknowledge that it does require, unfortunately, a certain amount of privilege to be able to put up a resistance in such a way. Because, of course, we don't all have the means to say fuck you to our boss who asks us to work over extra hours, or to say today I'm gonna take a day off. We can't all do that, unfortunately. I wish everybody could do that for sure. But there is a way, I think, for those of us who have this privilege and those of us who have less privilege to come together and to actually truly form a movement of resistance together against the bigger groups, the most powerful groups who tell us what to do and who tell us to work our asses off and to grind and to hustle to get to our goals. Then Adrienne Maree Brown proceeds to expose, quote unquote, the kind of love that we have been taught to believe in.
Yes.
And to accept and to even crave and to practice. So actually, I wanted to kind of take a moment to go over the list of the quote-unquote love guidelines that Adrienne Maree Brown presents as being part of what our society teaches us. So we can do that together and we can check or uncheck what we've been.
Yes, sounds good.
Yeah, that's a fun little game of let's confront our own patterns.
All right. I'm ready for it.
Yes.
I had a therapy session today, so I'm all fine.
Oh, yeah. You're all cried out already.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So the first list is called Who Have We Been Loving? So the first point is the people who cross our physical or virtual paths, spark the flame of our interest, earn our devotion and respect and protection.
Check.
Check.
Proudly.
Check.
Proudly check.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. The second point is our own family, because blood.
Check, I guess.
Depends which family member for my personal in my personal experience.
Yeah.
But I do get the because blood, like as if loving your family was a right rather than something that needs to be earned.
Yeah, exactly. But also this is what I have with some of my relatives who have crossed so many boundaries with me in the past, and I kept thinking that I loved them when I didn't actually have to. But blood, you know what I mean?
Yeah. As if they were all entitled to our love.
Exactly.
Like, no, excuse me, but that's a no. Not anymore.
No, that needs to change, yeah.
Yeah. And the last point of this list is people we are committed to but don't like anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately, check.
Yeah, same for me, unfortunately, check. I'm in the same situation as you. I also have those kind of relationships in my life. And I think that stems from the fact that I built those relationships when I was younger and when I had much less boundaries built for myself and much less self-respect.
Absolutely, because this list really kind of is like an invitation for me to reevaluate with whom I insist on practicing love, when the very nature of that contact transforms this love into something that is less pleasant, you know? And I think, to me, a very clear sign of growth and healing is when some of these dysfunctional relationships just can't find a grip on my life anymore. They just like fall off me, you know?
Yes.
Because that hurt part in me that needed that connection would have already healed and moved on, and those harmful dynamics just can't survive anymore. That's also why with growth, it just changed for me as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of those toxic relationships were formed in earlier years in my life as well.
But it's great for you to notice that actually with your wounds healing, certain relationships just detach themselves from you.
Yeah.
That's pretty fucking wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. Automatically, seriously. I love that. That's such a gift.
Yeah. Totally a gift. So moving on to the second list, this one is called How Have We Been Loving?
Okay.
I'm scared.
Go for it.
Have we been loving by first point, defining love by obligation?
What is it for you? I would say uncheck for this one for myself.
Yeah, actually, nowadays I would say no. But when I was younger, I would say yes. I used to do that a lot.
In which kind of relationships especially?
Well, for example, I think that relates also with the family obligation.
I understand, yeah.
I have some relatives with whom I've had lots of arguments and sometimes encounters that became violent, and I still felt like I had to love them.
Or that you had to accept their presence or something.
Yeah, and that I had to almost maybe fake loving them when we were all together and fake this perfect family picture because they're my family. But that's more related to the points we touched upon earlier. But yeah, for me, that's how I've loved by obligation in the past.
Okay, I understand. Yeah.
So half check.
Yeah.
The second point is celebrating love on externally marked holidays.
For me, that's an uncheck. I'm a very spontaneous celebrator of my loved ones, and my father is also like that with me. He can just call me to say he loves me and he misses me, or I give my loved ones presents much more often when it's not their birthday or like a special holiday or something. Like, it's quite random for me.
Yeah, I'm the same way. So I would say unchecked too. But not to say that I haven't engaged on like Valentine's Day or Christmas or Easter or whatever. Yeah. I love those too. And the last point of this list that I want to check or uncheck with you, because there are many others, but I'll let our listeners discover those points themselves. So the last point is, have we been loving by prioritizing romantic love over self, comrade, and friend love?
This one resonates with me, not because this is what I practice, but because I have witnessed this practice so many times.
Same.
I think I can confidently say that I never really did this, not that I'm aware of, from very early teenage years on. But you know that cliche of like a friend disappearing out of your life once they begin romantically partnering someone, you know?
Yeah.
I went through that a lot, and perhaps this is what they needed for themselves at that time, whatever, but in the context of our friendship, it really didn't feel so nice, and it doesn't feel nice when that happens. This kind of treatment, it often leaves me feeling like the friendship between us was more like a pastime destruction until the person finds the one or something.
And it just feels like we were kind of used, right? for
it
this.
It kind of feels like that.
Yeah, I know it's not the case, of course, but this is just how it feels in the moment sometimes.
Yeah.
But I completely agree with you. I wouldn't check it for myself, because I mean, I know I've done it in the past when I was way younger, when I was, teenage love, whatever, and that wasn't a good decision, but I definitely did that. But in my adult life, I can proudly say that I've never done it, but just like you, or I hope I've never done it, oh my god.
Yeah, right, you doubt yourself, like I'm also... But I think one reason I never really felt tempted to practice such a shift in my expression of love is that I think this behavior also roots more in a heteropatriarchal monogamous modes of relationship building, like how you close off as a monogamous couple, a man and a woman.
Yeah.
And queer relationships, queer friendships and camaraderie is often formed upon a resistance to that culture, kind of. And I think part of the reasons my friendships mattered so much to me was the inner knowledge that what's out there, the norm, wasn't made for me. I didn't belong in those ready-made structures, so I had to create my own family out of friends, comrades, and I guess people I have a more sexually or romantically loaded communication with,
Yeah, exactly. That kind of... how do you say, example of love, of being two people and kind of shutting down the rest of the world is very, very heterosexual.
Yes, exactly. I mean, in terms of Florence Given, I feel petrified when I witness such behavior.
I mean, that's what we're shown, right? All the time when you read even books as classic as freaking Romeo and Juliet, or when you watch romantic comedies, they find each other, this man and this woman, and they form a couple, and suddenly that's all they have in their lives. They're just a couple.
I think that's also where my allergy to word taken stems from. Like, I hate that word.
Don't take me.
I'm taken. Taken. They write in their bios like taken. Oh, okay, well, whatever. Off the market. Yeah, that's also so disturbing to me.
Oh, that's so gross. That's so gross.
That's so gross.
I once ran into an old how would you say, fellow student from high school. And I asked her, oh, how are you doing? How have you been since we left high school? And her answer was, well, I'm married.
Well, that's good.
And I was kind of like, that's it. That's all. This is how you define yourself.
But perhaps for her, maybe it was indeed something to really celebrate
Yeah.
and to identify with proudly.
Yeah, of course. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't be proud of it, but I just found it odd that the only thing that she could define herself with and the only thing that happened in a 4-year time was the fact that she got married. And to me, that was also quite heterifying to see that this is the only thing in her life that she could think of.
I understand your point and how you felt when you witnessed this friend who was very one-on-one with the given narrative somehow, right?
But good for her.
Yeah, good for her. Hope she's happy.
Yeah, I am, by the way, not shaming people who are getting married, not straight people, not gay people, not whoever. I'm just saying it's a funny anecdote that hetrified me at the time.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
why.
Yeah. But, friendship romance is something that I miss in my life quite often. By which I mean, I think we can make our friends feel special more often and appreciate the beauty and healing they bring into our lives and the times we went through together, the pain and the joy, or more of these like big crying consensual hugs, like crying together, or more deeply intimate conversations when all parts feel safer. I like that.
Yeah, definitely. I like that
and when
too.
I catch like glimpses of that kind of a connection with a friend, that feels so good to me.
It feels fulfilling.
Yeah, it feels so fulfilling. It feels so profound somehow.
So going back to the book, as we have seen by going through this wonderful list of check and uncheck, Adrienne Maree Brown basically points out all the ways in which the kind of love that we are taught is kind of designed to fail us in many ways, since it is based on and also most probably born from heteronormativity, capitalism, and patriarchy.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty clear to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And the way I see it from going through the list, but also thinking about the love that we've been advertised for so many years, that love seems to be very conditional, while being concealed behind almost like a pretty Instagram filter called the Unconditional Love. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's how I see it. I mean, to me, when I see this love, now that I am able to kind of take a step back and look at the kind of love that we've been taught to crave, taught to pursue, taught to practice, it doesn't seem very inclusive or sustainable. It almost seems like it's put on a pedestal, but it's a very fragile pedestal because it's just selling an image rather than a deeper, more fulfilling, more energizing kind of love.
Yeah. Wow, isn't that so worrying?
Yeah.
The way we love is harmed so much.
Yes.
That's so worrying to me. Like, how did that happen? But also, sometimes I think of the term unconditional love, and I'm only able to come in terms with that or feel comfortable with that when it includes boundaries as well, right?
Yeah.
So then I don't call a boundary a condition, but for me to be able to feel unconditional love and to feel love as something that is inexhaustible, like Adrienne Maree Brown also says, there should be very defined and healthy, comfortable boundaries within that, right? Like, for example, some relatives that I just mentioned who harmed me in some ways, I don't feel like they really deserved what I mean when I say unconditional love from me. You know what I mean? I feel like that's like this beautiful, profound, positive energy that I have to decide on sharing with whom and under what kind of terms and what kind of boundaries.
Yeah.
In that sense, I don't claim that it's an exhaustible source, but it is a source that I want to treat very carefully somehow.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And in my opinion, the only unconditional love that I want to feel is towards myself.
Beautiful.
I don't really, and it's not that I'm not gonna love my partner fully. That's not what I'm saying. But just like you said, in any kind of relationship, whether romantic or family or friendship, I want to love the other person fully while still respecting each other's boundaries and each other's needs and each other's feelings and working through this relationship and evolving together.
And it's so beautiful how you said, I think unconditional love towards ourselves is maybe the main condition for growth, right? How are we going to grow without unconditional love to ourselves?
Exactly. And I think that's the kind of unconditional love that we should be teaching, the one that is towards ourselves, the one that should always be there.
Yeah, so beautiful.
I actually wanted to read another little quote from Adrienne Maree Brown about this love that she described and that we've been talking about. This quote is just really touching and really confronting, but it also led me to feel hopeful in a way. I won't spoil it now, but I will just read it so you understand better.
All right.
This is on page 60. She says, quote, "We're all going to die if we keep loving this way, die from isolation, loneliness, depression, abandoning each other to oppression, from lack of touch, from forgetting we are precious. We can no longer love as a secret or a presentation, as something we prioritize, hoard for the people we know. Prioritizing ourselves in love is political strategy, is survival." End quote.
Spot on.
Very, very spot on. I love this quote. I love this part of the text, and I think she so beautifully put it. It's both very shaking, but also comforting in a way. Is that weird to say?
No, but I also feel like this quote, beneath it, I feel a lot of vibrations around transformative justice and how transformative justice requires the kind of love she mentions here. And the spaces of punitive justice that we have at the moment is so devoid of love, right?
Yeah.
That's very interesting. For me, actually, in this part, lack of touch was very interesting. And I wanted to shift its context to the pandemic a little bit. And I wanted to ask you, how did you experience this lack of touch during this time? Or does it have a significance in your life in general?
I mean, definitely, especially as you said, we are living in a world where we have to restrain ourselves from touching each other, right? Even just hugging your friend, hugging your family. And to me, I mean, I'm part of the population that, to begin with, I am a homebody, as one might say. So the lack of touch wasn't something that I really felt until really deep into the first lockdown, for example. After not seeing people for almost 3 months, I really missed and really felt like I needed to hug my friends and see them and just, put my hand on your shoulder when I'm laughing or small little gestures like that. What about you?
During the pandemic, I missed touching with friends for sure. I missed hugging a lot. I missed saying hello and goodbye hugging, even that. I really lacked that somehow. And the consensual gestures of love when you put your hand on the shoulder of your friend or lean on the shoulder of your friend with your own shoulder on a couch or something, like sitting so close and just laughing and giggling and hitting each other because you're giggling too hard. I just really missed all of that. And during the pandemic, of course, at the moment, keeping the distance makes perfect sense to me, but I really did miss the physical closeness. Also, I missed dancing together closely, jumping and panting and laughing without being afraid of like deadly germs floating around.
Definitely.
But on another note, like funnily enough, I have experienced a lack of touch in my romantic relationships after having moved to Holland.
Mm.
In my experience, and solely based on my own observation and perhaps my projection, that Dutch culture isn't very touchy-feely.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I mean, I do appreciate their deep sense of personal space and body autonomy. I really appreciate that a lot. But in other ways, for example, I heard for like a couple of years ago, there was a discussion on whether or not Dutch children were receiving enough displays of affection by their parents through hugs and kisses. And you know, I'm Turkish, and hugs and kisses have always been a part of my family. As a child, when I would go to say goodnight to my parents, I would just jump on their bed and just roll around on my mother and father's bodies and hugging and kissing them. And with my sister also, we have always been so physically close and always showed each other love like that. So this is actually quite a basic need for me, to be able to have this consensual, intimate touch with loved ones. And this really reflected on my romantic relationships in Turkey, for example, with people from that culture. Lots of touch, lots of display of affection by hugs and kisses that all the parties involved know that it's okay. But in Holland, I really had to tell my partners like many times over that I was kind of lacking this. Like I literally had to tell them so many times that I even got bored of arguing for it, and I would just say like, more touch please, to really like request for myself like a warm hand on my body. And honestly, it's not as nice, of course, when you have to state it to receive it, you know? I mean, Brown also states here that when she talks about radical honesty, she mentions how we need to speak our needs and be able to say, I need to hear that you miss me, you know? But sometimes it's also very nice when that need is fulfilled without us having to ask for it, kind of.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know if you share that same observation, but this is my experience here.
I've also noticed this particular specialty of the Dutch. Let's just put it that way. It's definitely different because in my family, we've also always been very tender physically towards each other. My mother, my father, my aunt, my cousin, who I consider like my sister, we've always hugged and kissed on the cheeks before we say goodbye or when we say hello and such. And here, you know, I did notice that even in family settings, people don't really sit next to each other and like lean on one another. Of course, not nowadays because of the pandemic, but even before that, I noticed that that wasn't really a thing. Whereas when I go back to France, I'm gonna sit really close to my cousin on the couch, and we're gonna be almost hugging while being on our phones, you know, and doing something completely different. So I definitely see see where you're coming from, and I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But it's good that you talked about the section Radical Honesty, because that was also really, really such a great section in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, it is incredible the way that she talks about it. And I was actually curious, but before I ask you this question, for our listeners, in case you don't know what radical honesty means, and basically I'm going to base my description off of what Adrienne Maree Brown presents in the book. So practicing radical honesty would mean, for example, speaking your mind, your feelings, your needs openly, and I would quote even Adrienne Maree Brown by saying from the roots, and creating an open and accepting communication space in which we can safely share and listen to one another. That's how I would describe it.
Yeah.
But I was curious to ask you actually, when was the last time you practiced radical honesty, if ever? But knowing you, I feel like you've already done it.
I try to do it as often as I can. Well, there is an incident, but it's kind of private with a friend. Yeah, but in that situation, there was a lot to be careful of, and I had to juggle with 1,000 pieces, but I still stayed loyal radically to my honesty. And even though it was difficult for both of us, I had to do that, and I think that was the right decision. I rarely feel radical honesty is not a good... I don't even know if I ever felt that it's not a good thing. I mean, it can be uncomfortable, but so be it.
Exactly. I don't think it's necessarily easy to practice radical honesty, and it definitely can be uncomfortable or maybe even painful at times, probably. But I think it's worth learning and worth practicing, even little by little. I just believe it's such a great tool for us as a community, us as, family, friends, relationships, romantic, at work. Yeah. But being honest to begin with can be difficult for people. Because
Yeah.
I mean, and that's something that Adrienne Mary Brown actually touches on in this section when she points out the relationship between love and lying. She says that basically we kind of learn to lie for love, any kind of love, not necessarily romantic, but we kind of lie to protect, to attract, to avoid, to escape. And I think lying to protect another person's feelings is one of the reasons why it can be difficult to be honest in relationships, because that's something that's kind of anchored in us, that omitting something or lying to the other person would be better to protect them.
Totally agree.
And in this chapter, so we already touched on radical honesty, but Adrienne Mary Brown wrote what she calls a brief radical love manifesto, and it also includes topics such as healing, learn how to change, and build communities of care, which are all so incredibly well-written and detailed texts. And I was wondering what were the points that most resonated with you in this love manifesto.
The part on healing is the part I underlined many times over, I think. And this acknowledgement of trauma being the common experience of most humans on this planet is just precious to me, seriously. Because we don't acknowledge this enough, and we don't treat each other within that frame also. But we all grew up in racist, heteropatriarchal, capitalist environments, and we were all shamed to even attempt to show genuine emotion and character many times, right? And all of us went through so many different kinds of harm and abuse. And I love how she states that this acknowledgement should lead to the normalization of healing.
Yes.
And as I focus on my healing more and more, so much of my communication with others also began revolving around that. And so much of my work also began centering healing. It feels like the most urgent and worthy thing we can do with our lives, somehow. And the true communal healing feels like the only way we can push back and eventually dismantle the systems that constantly harm us, I feel.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree.
So important.
To me, it's still so shocking that we don't hold space for one another, for each other as a society, for our own healing.
Yeah.
It can almost be seen as something shameful to have to heal from something in our society and take time to heal. And I just find it sad because rather than shaming each other or neglecting that part of our journey, of our path, why don't we come together to heal? Why don't we encourage each other to heal? Why don't we keep working together to heal as individuals, but also as a community?
I mean, not very long ago, therapy was an absolute taboo, no? People would be... Yeah, the approach people had towards therapy was just, to me, totally unacceptable. And that shows a lot of internalized oppression to me, internalized white supremacist capitalistic oppression that says, like, how dare you want to prioritize your emotional world or like your subconscious world? How dare you prioritize this healing when you have to work, when you have to function and be a mother and be a father and be a this and that? There's so much internalized oppression in that approach that says how ridiculous that you're trying to heal, you know?
Yeah.
That shame they put on healing. When I talk about healing a lot, I just sometimes I feel in some of the individuals who are present this shift in their eyes that says, like, wait a second, yes. Like, why am I not talking about my healing enough?
Yeah.
Like, I need to prioritize. This is actually really important, you know? And I really appreciate all my own mentors who drove my attention towards my own healing as well. really thankful for that. I think that's really important. We really have to be busy with that, I feel. That's the only way.
Definitely. And I think it should be destigmatized for sure for us all to be able to embark on a journey of healing and talk about it openly without feeling like we're the weird one or like we're not normal or like people are gonna think that we're not strong enough, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
For me, the section Learn How to Change was also really impactful because what I really liked about what Adrienne Maree Brown touches on in this short section is that she rightfully points out how we all need to learn to accept and even maybe embrace change, both within ourselves and outside of us. And I was wondering how you, as a person, have been handling change throughout your life, and if you are able to welcome it, whether it is a change that happens completely outside of you or that is deeply anchored within you.
Yeah, I mean, for example, the current post-graduation period you and I are in right now, that definitely requires a certain adaptation to this change, right? A certain strategic adaptation to it. And just I've been recently thinking on how rest and shaping change has to go hand in hand for me in this transitional period. And this is how I try to approach it. I need to kind of compensate the shakiness I receive from the perception of change with some rest. Resting makes me feel more equipped to deal with that change somehow. I don't resist it so much. Big changes happen. It did happen in my life and yours, and probably for many of our listeners as well. I don't resist it that much, but I have my healthy tools dealing with it, but I also have my other unhealthy patterns that sometimes surface when I go through a change, and that I am trying to unpack and work through. But interesting, because my observation following Brown's work for this long is that actually a much larger body of her work revolves around this, around change, and from Butler's Octavia Butler's lesson of change, and of that being the only lasting truth, and how can we shape that? How can we shape change? And Adrienne Maree Brown's other book, Emergent Strategy, which is something I hope we can talk about together as well, is literally sourced in this acknowledgement and is about methods of shaping change. And it's so beautiful.
Wow, wonderful. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's I think it's really that's the center, shaping change. And how do we do that? All the methods in personal ways and in movements, and with a lot of lessons from nature, from the way animals or mushrooms do these things, how they adapt.
That's so true.
Yeah, it's beautiful also. Emergent Strategy definitely is an incredible work as well.
Yeah, that's another book we need to read together.
Yes, please. I would love to.
I can definitely see how change and shaping change, like you said, is at the focus of this book that we're reading right now. Definitely.
Also,
yeah, because all throughout, I mean, she's shaping change in the way that we all approach and practice pleasure, right? And that is such a beautiful thing too.
Yeah. The last sentence of this chapter is beautiful, I think, and I want to read that. Make a commitment with 5 people to be more honest with each other, heal together, change together, and become a community of care that can grow to hold us all.
Yes.
Yes. A big orgasmic yes to that.
I love this this quote as well. I thought it was such a beautiful way to end this chapter. Thank you for sticking with us this far. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. So, time to move on to the last chapter for today's episode, which is an essay titled The Sweetness of Salt, Toni Cade Bambara, and the Practice of Pleasure in 5 Tributes. gorgeous title, by the way, which was written by Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who Adrienne Maree Brown introduces as, quote, Alexis is one of the most consistent yeses I know, her life full of rest, love, beauty, and travel. She is a poet, a sewer, and a scholar of many things centering around Black feminism, end quote.
I would also like to state that Gumbs is also the author of Undrowned, Black Feminist Lessons from Marine Mammals, which I am dying to read. Since I pre-ordered it, I also received it with a beautiful pin with 3 dolphins on it that you see on the cover of the book as well.
Yes.
I love it. And rereading this section, the Sweetness of Salt, reignited in me my excitement to read more from Gumbs. And because her written voice is just so brilliant and so special. And in this chapter, she pays homage to her mentors, teachers, friends, and relating their lives and practices to the work of Toni Cade Bambara. And I have small notes from each section of this 5-part homage. And I want to touch on them one by one.
Yes, wonderful. And so in this essay, as you said it yourself, Alexis Pauline Gumbs introduces us to the work and the person that is Toni Cade Bambara and her legacy of pleasure practice through 5 perspectives, 5 experiences, 5 women who themselves have experienced Bambara in one way or another. And these women she tells the story of are Farah Jasmine Griffin, Aisha Shahida Simmons, Kai Lumumba Barrow, Kara Paige, who we already know from the first episode, and Cheryl Green. And for those of you who do not know her, Toni Cade Bambara is a Black author, documentary filmmaker, and social activist who wrote books such as The Salt Eaters and the short story collection titled Gorilla, My Love, among many others, of course. And I'd like to start off by saying that I found this chapter to be incredibly comforting. I don't know if you felt the same way, but to me it felt like a warm hug. A really warm hug full of compassion and power and love and care and knowledge. And I just loved reading about these women's experiences. And I just love the way Alexis Pauline Gumbs addressed it and wrote about it too. I think she did a fantastic job.
Yeah.
Each of her tributes have a different approach to pleasure and its practice, and all of them kind of go against what our society teaches or even values. In the first section, in the first tribute, which is dedicated to Farah Jasmine Griffin, Alexis Pauline Gumbs talks about how Griffin consciously chooses to cherish, to protect, and celebrate her girl child self. And I just find it so beautiful the way that she puts it, the way that she tells us this story. To put it into perspective, she talks at some point about the traumatic loss that Griffin suffered as a child when her father passed away after his life was let down and denied the help it needed by the system itself.
Yeah.
She just, despite that trauma, despite witnessing how the system perpetuates all forms of violence against Black lives and chooses to let down Black lives at such a young age, Griffin chose to love and honor her girl child self, to love her Black body, to love Black people, Black lives, and to live her life in the fullest way possible, in joy, in pleasure, which she shares and spreads beautifully.
Yeah.
I mean, there's even in this tribute a point where Gumbs says, quote, how Farah listens to jazz music in a way that allows her to find new parts of herself to grow into, end quote.
Beautiful.
That's so beautiful to me. That is to me, that's the definition of reclaiming yourself and reclaiming your joy and reclaiming your pleasure actively in your body and fully. What did you think about this tribute, Mais?
About the gift written for Farah Jasmine Griffin, Gumbs says here, when she reads our work, when she writes us recommendations, when we turn back to thank her, she says, "Oh, it's my pleasure." And we believe her. So when I read that, the importance of such mentors in our lives just came into my mind, because these people with whom we have this precious relationship of respecting their efforts and labor on bettering our lives, while knowing deep down that this is indeed their pleasure, right? And Gumbs later names Griffin as an intellectual mother, and how she became her intellectual daughter. And when I read this, I recognized in myself the longing for this kind of a relationship.
Yeah.
I had many mothers, and many of whom, after helping me in any way, when they'd say it's my pleasure, I believed. But often this dynamic took place outside of the specific situation of a mentor-apprentice kind of relationship. Much more often in life, I had to find my way by myself in that sense. And I really felt a lack of mentorship in my life. And this is actually a pain within me. And I feel this realization hurting me somewhere, on my body. And I hope one day this can be something I make peace with, or that I find my intellectual mother and become an intellectual son to someone or something.
That would be so beautiful. And I completely understand this craving, to be honest. I think everyone should be able to receive that kind of mentorship in their lives. Yeah. And there are so many people in this world who are gifted enough to become mentors, to become lights in somebody's path.
Yeah, exactly. Another small note I had on this part was on how Griffin, as a child, was drawn to the image of Toni Cade Bambara on the cover of her book, The Black Woman, and asked her father to buy it for her. And how later in life, so much of her work centered around the teachings of Bambara. And how this book became one of the precious entities she shared with her father, who was taken away from her by racist police violence. And how her father's gift has grown to mean so much more later in life. Like the first time I read this essay, I cried, literally. I had to close the book and cry a bit. It made me feel so tender and so sad to see this in the perspective of a lifetime, of the lifetime of Griffin, and that relationship with her father, that relationship with her people, and later her tutors or intellectual daughters and sons, Yeah. But also, what I wanted to talk about this point, also the way Griffin was drawn to this book, it reminds me of how much subconscious knowledge we contain about who we are and what we find important, even as a little child. Because being drawn to something in childhood perhaps is something we can look into and assess the compatibility of our current path to who we are and what we'd rather center around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I remember loving writing stories as a child and illustrating those stories and making new books, comics, and a series of what I called novels back then. Or I remember the moment when I was introduced to this distant relative when I was like 6 or 7, and that they told me that he was an artist. And I was blown away. I remember thinking like, yes, I'm an artist too. Wait, you can be an artist. And there are artists on this earth. And I love him. I love so much that he was staying over at our house that night. And early next morning, I slipped out of my bed and went to his room, to the guest room, and hugged him in bed.
You are so cute.
I know. He woke up and he took me to the living room where we talked a bit about random things. But that fascination I felt and the intensity of that memory never left me.
Wow.
And that intense kinship I felt with someone who was an artist,
That's such a beautiful experience.
Yeah. And there are so many other examples in my early life that affirm the things that I feel drawn to currently. And mind you, I come from a family in which no one really pursued a creative career also. No encouragement. That desire really came from within me. And I really appreciate how, as children, we already contain this information on what we find fascinating. Like, if we are able to hear that calling, or if we are allowed to stay in contact with that calling, we can build much happier lives somehow. I guess some of us lose that contact with that child later on because of all the oppression around us. But Definitely. When we are able to maintain that, we can really move towards a very fulfilling and satisfiable life somehow, right?
I completely agree with you, 100%.
So interesting. Such an interesting place to look back to. As a child, what did I find fascinating? What excited me so much? And how is it compatible to what I do now, right?
Exactly. For me, for example, that's what I'm seeking, that excitement, fascination, enthusiasm that I used to have as a child when it came to starting new things or to going back and doing an activity that I was used to doing every single day. I'm trying to find that feeling again and to pursue it and to always do everything with that kind of energy.
Yeah. Such a precious energy. Such a precious affirmation of truth. Mm-hmm. Of this personal truth, right?
The rawest, less filtered, less modeled version of us, basically.
Exactly. Oh, how I wish I could just directly tap into that child.
Me too. Me too. Oh God, I wish. I really wish.
Oh my God. Imagine. I wish I could always consult a 7-year-old Mayus and say, like, hey, does that feel good with you? Does that work with you? even the most complicated communications, like, hey, what do you think of that?
And I'm sure that even 7-year-old Mayus would answer in the most eloquent way.
Yes. He would say, no, bitch, move on.
And that's eloquency for you.
Yes, exactly.
If that's
exactly.
even a word.
But before we move on to the next chapter, next part of this chapter, actually, I want to honor the father of Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who was also taken away by state policy and the racism of the medical industrial complex. And how she hears herself calling out to her father still, at different ages. Mm-hmm. That memory of that calling out to father in different ages, and the way she says demanding his presence and refusing his absence.
Yeah.
And later on she grows to become this person who's able to recognize the kind of smile Griffin has on her face. The sincere smile of joy in the moment. And going through all of that pain, that state-sanctioned pain, and still maintaining such connection to this joyful nuance in life, right?
Yeah.
When I read this chapter, it just made me seriously just crumble and cry. It's just so beautiful. It's so beautiful.
So beautiful, so touching, so... Yeah, I mean, I have chills just thinking about it and seeing the words on the book that I have open in front of me.
Yeah.
Really beautiful. I think it's very good of you to want to honor that part and that person and that experience. Beautiful. Mm-hmm. Moving into the next tribute in this chapter, which is called Sister is a Verb and is a tribute for Aisha Shahida Simmons. Mm-hmm. And I just love that title, first of all.
Oh, yes. It immediately makes you go like, yes, sister is a verb. Yeah.
Sister is a fucking verb. That is so true.
Period.
And basically, in this tribute, Alexis Pauline Gumbs talks about how Aisha taught her what she herself learned from Toni Cade Bambara, which is that the word sister is a verb, and there's a beautiful text portion in which Gumbs elaborates on the concept of sistering, and I'd like to read it to you because my brain would never be able to come up with something so gorge.
Yes, please. That's the truth.
And that's on periods too. So the quote is the following. The sistering technologies that Aisha taught me can't be numbered here. But this is what I know. Sistering requires food. It requires specific intentional foods that support our spirits. Sistering meals can also last many hours. In New York, Durham, Greensboro, and Philadelphia, I have sat in restaurants and at home with Aisha for so many hours that multiple meal times have passed. Sistering seeks speaking. Even when it is many months between our conversations, Aisha has taught me not to wait until our work brings us to the same city coincidentally, but to intentionally make a phone date, even if we are sitting and eating in different rooms. Sistering begets more sisters and mothers and fathers and brothers. The chosen and given families of sisters in practice become family across and through the sistering. End quote.
Absolutely loves it.
Yes, I love this description. I love this. I almost see this as the first page of the kind of Bible I would follow.
Yes.
And I'm like, yes, abso-fucking-lutely.
Yes.
Excuse me. This is revolutionary.
Hey,
I
you know what?
love that.
I feel like we have been sistering each other since we met.
Yes, we have, actually.
I mean,
that's so true. We have.
Following this description also, like, our sistering always involved food when we were together, multiple meal times, speaking to each other regularly, and even, you know, how I brought Ceren into your life and how you brought your parents, Astrid and Jean-Louis, into my life.
Yes.
How they bring me presents, how they offer me a breakfast when they see me early in the morning, and how they helped me build down my graduation installation at Rietveld. You know, how Ceren sent you a present from Turkey.
A beautiful present.
We feel like we have been sistering each other, and apart from the fact that your parents prefer me as a child than you,
truth be told.
Our lives just also constantly coincide in such strange ways that makes us think that there's something deeper in this relationship than we know.
Yes, definitely. I completely agree with you. I think we've been sistering for so many years together now. And yes. I think maybe even lifetimes, because just like you just said, our lives mirror one another in such strange ways. It's like we're conjoined at the soul, you know what I mean?
Exactly, yeah.
And I find that really beautiful. I would hope that everyone, at least once in their life, gets to know that kind of friendship, that kind of relationship, that kind of sistering.
It's a beautiful emphasis also, because when we talk about mothering or fathering, we're not very surprised when we hear those terms, but why is it suddenly so surprising to hear that sister is a verb as well? Yeah, sistering is something. I love this emphasis on choosing familyhood, like intellectual mother, sistering each other. I love that so much.
So beautiful. I really loved this section, and I think it's a wonderful, wonderful tribute. It's funny because Alexis Pauline Gumbs herself asks questions after describing what sistering is and what it brought to her life. Yeah. And she asks questions such as, what is the freedom and accountability that accrues when sister is not just a static identity that you have, but is something that you do or don't do with consequences? Mm-hmm. And what happens when I apply that to all of my relationships? What happens if we replace the roles patriarchy has scripted us into with actions guided by what we want to create instead? End quote.
Yeah, this mention, Gumbs said, of Bambara's essay on the issue of roles, I think that was a brilliant argument to argue that we need to craft revolutionary relationships in action and not only in rhetoric, and in how, quote, revolution cannot be created by conforming to existing roles in relationships already defined by the systems we want to overthrow, end quote. I find this a brilliant insight on how we can reimagine the roles we sustain in our relationships to the community and to each other as individuals.
I completely agree.
There was a question I wanted to ask you in this section. Mm-hmm. You know, when Gumbs says, the already gone ancestors who are still healing through us, I wanted to ask you if you ever feel that you embody something like that. Do you feel that you embody ancestors who are still healing through you?
That's such an interesting question. Well, for me, I would say yes, but it's such a strange yes to say because I don't really have a connection at all with any of my origins and my roots. For those of you who don't know, which might be all of you, I was adopted, and so my birth country is Vietnam. And since I have no connection at all with this country anymore, sadly, it's hard for me to think of my ancestors as mine and feel legitimate to say that I feel them working through healings through me.
Interesting.
But at the same time, I definitely feel something, and I can honestly say that I always have, and that there is a lot of unfinished business, unresolved issues, unaddressed pain that happened generations and generations ago, way before my birth mother, way before my birth great grandmother, that are being worked through and attemptively resolved in my lifetime, in my own experience, and in my own body.
Yeah, I can imagine the disconnect you feel with Vietnam and the doubt you have about asserting a kind of connection to ancestors healing or moving through your body. On the other hand, I can imagine that perhaps even the sheer conditions that brought together the need for your adoption, even though we don't know many details around it, and you can always, of course, share the amount that you feel comfortable about.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it is difficult to separate that from a war that people went through.
Yeah.
And a massive trauma people went through together. And I feel like that connection to your ancestors, the thing that you said you feel, to me feels super valid, even if you didn't grow up there or that you don't have any physical communication to that place.
Thank you for validating it.
Of course.
And I think it's also difficult to, for me, openly say or talk about this feeling of working through past pains of my ancestors because I am French and I was adopted by French people, and France was actually a huge, huge reason of the traumas that my ancestors went through during the Vietnam War. And that's also something that I struggle with, navigating through that and thinking that I am part of a country who hurt so many of my ancestors and who are responsible for the pain that is being worked through by many Vietnamese people now.
Hey, by the way, I didn't want to trigger this exposition of very personal information from you with this question, so please feel free to
no, of course.
Edit this out. Feel free to take this out of this recording if you suddenly feel uncomfortable about what you shared. I think it was beautiful.
Thank you.
I think it's truly beautiful, but,
Thank you.
But please feel totally fine with it.
Thank you. That's very sweet. But I'm actually happy to share, and I don't mind at all sharing this part of my story. But actually, I am gonna turn the question on you and ask you if you feel that connection with your own ancestors' trauma and history.
Yeah. To me, it also feels quite complicated because ethnically, I am from a family of Turks in Turkey, which is the dominant and privileged ethnic group in that region, the controlling ethnic group, who caused many horrendous acts of violence towards other groups who shared the same land, you know. But my specific family has always stood against this violence and was able to see the historical context through the eyes of the oppressed, at least as much as they could. But perhaps part of what I embody from my ancestors who are still healing through me is either connected to ancestors who wanted to stand against this violence that was perpetuated in this land, or perhaps this pain that I clearly feel about my motherland in total, the pain that it carries in general. And even outside the context of my ethnicity, the violence that took place there and that still does, that's quite present for me. I do feel that connection with that region, that bigger diaspora even. And on the other hand, as a queer person, I definitely do feel a larger body of queer predecessors trying to heal through us. To me, it's really there. It's there in the ways in which we create communities, in the ways in which we try to find comfort and acceptance. So much trauma from my intensely and consistently bullied childhood is still living in my body, and I feel its connection to a bigger historical context as well. I know that it's as a deep knowledge. I know that my shallow breathing has something to do with that, or the muzzle that is always constricted above my belly has something to do with all of this trauma. And I'm working through all of that and feeling my ancestors, especially my sweet grandmother and my grandfather, is always very encouraging. I really welcome them working through my body and my presence on earth at the moment.
I think it's wonderful that you're so open to welcoming their healing.
It heals me too.
Yeah, I can imagine, definitely. Wonderful. So moving on to the next tribute, which is called Is Working, and is a tribute for Kai Lumumba Barrow. Actually, to me, this was very, I don't know, in a way, I had this feeling of fighting for community, I would say, and fighting for acceptance of your own self and fighting against erasure as well. That's what I felt in this tribute. I don't know if you can relate to those feelings.
Yes, I sensed it as well. Learning to lean into your survivorship, right? And transforming the worst and scariest moments into a source of strength. And it is, of course, easier said than done. But I just want to appreciate Gumbs reminding us of this possibility, right? That this can be possible for some of us. And I do consider my own survivorship as a source of current strength. And even though those times really were terrible, and I can't help but wonder sometimes who I would be had I not experienced those. But as I try to accept what is as is, I am more and more able to see how those experiences also strengthened me in many ways. I'm very curious to hear what you think about this.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a journey that I think is very unique yet very universal. I don't know if that makes sense for anyone listening, but I find that the experiences that led me here, if I relate them, to the space and the community that I want to hold in my life and share and build and create, they can't go separately. They cannot be separated. They need to be acknowledged. In a way, for example, if I related to what Gumbs says in this specific tribute, and the way that she talks about how Kai Lumumba Barrow chooses to create and to bring joy in community and in action. For example, when she wants the flyers for the Day of Truth-Telling event to be bright neon pink, and to make sure that the protest route is danceable in heels. That is that is so much fun, but that is also, to me, such an act of rebellion.
Yeah. It feels like, of course, we have to be able to dance.
Yeah, exactly. And of course we have to be colorful, and of course we should be allowed to be our brightest self. And I think in relation to what I was trying to say before, attempting, it is the experiences that Barrow lived through that allowed her to grasp a completely different perspective of life, and that fuels her to bring and to create that kind of joy within a group and within a community.
What an alchemy, right?
Completely.
Beautiful.
I just love that this was the the underlying energy for the specific event. For example, I like the idea of seeing those bright neon pink flyers everywhere, and
joy of graphic design also, right?
yeah. Yes,
Like our manifestos, our manifestations on paper or print or on the wall being aligned with what we say or what we do and fitting and looking beautiful, you know?
Exactly. Yeah, hell yeah. So moving on to the next tribute, which is for Cara Paige, and it is called Dance Until You Laugh Until You Sing, which I find to be really, really beautiful and touching as a title. In this wonderful tribute, there's a moment where we talk about Paige's 40th birthday celebration, actually, and that was a moment in this tribute that I absolutely fell in love with, because it is again related to community and to enjoying together and creating joy together. Yeah. It was an event that involved dancing and laughing and eating and being loud, being bright, together as a community, as a group. And I just found it so beautiful to see how celebration is not only something that is light and fun, but also something that is deeply nourishing, intellectually, emotionally. Gumbs actually says, quote, Cara taught me that the best part of this whole thing, the beautifully chosen words, the eloquently argued for funding, the inventive structures and gatherings, is how we get to be together, how we get to enjoy each other's genius. We get to do that, end quote.
Defining movement in that frame, right? Defining movements in this context.
Fuck yeah. And I love that. I think it's super, super beautiful.
I just really appreciate how Gumbs here is sharing her appreciation of Cara Paige in very detailed ways of how she ingeniously participated in the movements they have been in together. It makes me very curious about further learning about Paige when she says when Gumbs says how she understood that it was all about tapping into that relationship from cell to body to galaxy, and comprehending that connection. If you say that you've learned this from someone, I'm already very curious about that someone.
Definitely, beautiful. I agree. That is curiosity enticing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I would love to be described this way to somebody. One day, maybe.
You are quite curiosity enticing for me.
For all the wrong reasons, I'm sure.
I often feel like, what the fuck is she?
Who the fuck is that? Yeah. Anyway, we can now move on to actually the last tribute of this chapter, which is a wonderful tribute. It was written for Cheryl Green, and it is called The Reaching Hands Women. Yeah. I think, again, Gumbs did such a tremendous job at relating somebody else's story and somebody else's experience. Cheryl Green is such a beautiful, beautiful person who achieved so much, including being the executive editor, at the Essence magazine, which was the, quote, the most widely read and long-lasting magazine for Black women on the planet, end quote. That's so fucking cool, excuse me.
Yeah, that's badass.
That's fucking badass. I love how this magazine existed and was created, and how it held a space and a place and a heart of value for people who needed and missed that kind of space.
Yes, exactly.
That leads me to actually the event that Cheryl organized called the Essence Women Writers Retreat, which happened in the Bahamas. excuse me, with so many beautiful, badass, creative Black women writer, including our beautiful and wonderful Octavia Butler and Toni Cade Bambara, among many others.
I couldn't believe that. I thought, like, am I understanding this correctly? That they were there? What?
Can you imagine them on a freaking island in the Bahamas for I don't know how many days, 5 days maybe, together, being their most fulfilling, free, creative, open selves with one another?
Wow, I can't believe it. It's still not very clear to me, because she says all the writers you want to name were there, and the ones who didn't come were invited. And then she goes on listing them, and that includes Toni Cade Bambara and Octavia Butler. And when I read it, I was like, wait, was she there or was she just invited? What? But if, oh my God, imagine if she was there.
I'm pretty sure she was there, because there is a quote at some point, or maybe it was Toni Cade that she was talking about, where, oh yes, exactly. It's at the end of page 78. Gumbs talks about watching the video, actually, of one of the nights, and she says, quote, "I saw Octavia Butler demand a world where she wasn't the only Black woman science fiction author," end quote. So I think she was indeed there, along with Toni Cade Bambara.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful.
Isn't that so fucking cool?
Yes, what? That's the kind of time-traveling tourism I need. Or just to see that video, please. I would love to see that.
Oh yeah, they should share the video, please.
I would love to see that. I would love to see that video.
I mean, it's just legendary, iconic history being made right there. I can't believe I was never made aware of this event.
Exactly.
And it sounded like they had a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
Gumbs says that they, quote, met with each other over cocktails and body watched. They experimented with water sports. They flew. They dove. They wore very bright colors. They bought sheer bathing suit wraps. They laughed so much and luxuriated in the Atlantic and the blackness of it all, end quote.
And one brilliant moment in this text for me is when Gumbs says that when Green showed her the photo album from the retreat, showing Black women at joy and play with smiles and drinks and fun and friendship, she was teaching her something, right? And this makes me want to jump back to a quote from the book by Adrienne Maree Brown. Quote, "Yes has a future. Witnessing an embodied yes in the body of a historically oppressed person is irresistible to me," end quote. And this is exactly what was happening there when Gumbs was witnessing that photo that Green showed her. She was seeing the embodiment of yes on the bodies of historically oppressed people. Such a lesson.
Exactly. That was actual legacy being passed on to her. Oh.
It's really showing like, hey, this is possible, this is what we deserve, and this is the kind of world we want to create and demand. Exactly. I love that. Hey, by the way, this text really inspired me to take action to create our own retreats. What do you say? I think we should really try and create one together.
That could be so cool. I would love that. I would absolutely love that.
Playing games, cooking and eating together, reading together, dancing together, and learning crafts and recipes from each other. I mean, yeah. Perhaps even we can create circles similar to what Gumbs mentions here, expressing our thoughts and desires with radical honesty, right? This thought really gets me so excited. We should do this.
Me too. I would be so excited to collaborate with people who are kind of experts in that realm, right? Of circles
with
and
those amazing facilitators and creating this environment together would be so much fun. I hope we can at least be part of one, or perhaps even create one in the future.
Yeah, me too.
One other crucial teaching Gumbs shares is when she said that Green parted the way between what you thought you were saying and what you needed to actually say.
Mm-hmm.
And I observe this in movement circles sometimes, the ones we create or become a part of. Sometimes we mean something very different than what we actually say. And very often, some of us can see beyond those words and reach to what the other actually meant. But still, within this, I feel that it's very important to create and practice a vocabulary that is readily available at reach when talking about oppression, harm, and abuse, with the help of activists and writers who have already provided us with a rich glossary and theory around them, you know? I really take listening others as an important tool for learning on how to phrase certain things.
Absolutely.
When I come across an excellent way of expressing something, I immediately take note of that and I repeat it to myself in random moments in a day.
That's so good.
Yeah. It's not about perfecting it, but it's about finding this organic alignment with what we mean and what we say. And another part, how Gumbs described Green as a chosen mother. I love that. Tea and warm berets, vulnerability, the voice of a village of grandmothers never displaced. You know, I love this so much.
I love it too.
Just as I long for an intellectual mother, I actually also long for a grandmother again, Lucy. Seriously, my dear sweet grandmother who literally saved my life, she passed away in 2012. And I really long for a relationship similar to that somehow, to what I had with her. Sometimes I just really feel like a cozy, sweet grandmother is all I need in this life. Yeah, I need that.
I can imagine. I can completely imagine. I mean, you might find someone who would love to take on this role for you in your life and be this presence of guidance and of comfort and warmth.
Grandchild is a verb. I want to grandchild someone. Hey, the last point I have from this that I wanted to share with you is how Gumbs wanted to conduct a long interview with Green before her death.
Yeah.
And with hopes of archiving her life better. And in the text she says, I wanted to beg, give me your whole life and I will keep it. And I wonder if this is a feeling familiar to you, because I feel that with a lot of people that I love and find inspirational. You know, the last years of their lives, I worked so hard to archive the lives of my grandparents. I even had to miss a whole semester at Rietveld Academy to conduct interviews with my grandfather back in Turkey. You would probably remember that time. I felt like this was something that was really important for me. And I often feel that. I feel it with some other friends also. And you know, even when I visited our teacher from Rietveld, Paul van den Berg, at his home, I was fascinated by so much history scattered all around. I almost wanted to ask him, like, hey, allow me to archive this all, please. Because I have this strange feeling that I alone would be capable of retaining such valuable data in the proper way on the long run, you know? Maybe this comes from my Virgo ascendant. Maybe it's something I need to discuss with my therapist. I not only archive my own life, I also love archiving the lives of others I know and find fascinating. And I wonder if that's the same for you.
I did that when I was younger. I interviewed both of my grandparents when they were still alive. And it was kind of like documenting their love story as told by them. So, yeah, I've always kind of wanted to archive the stories, the knowledge, and the personalities and the lives of people in my life who inspire me and who I find to be precious. Sadly, this video, I saved it and I edited it. I remember I must have been 14 or something like that, maybe 15.
Wow.
Sadly, it disappeared and I never found it again.
I'm so sorry. That's such a loss.
Yeah, it's such a huge loss.
Wow. I'm really sorry.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I find it randomly one day while looking through old USB sticks or something.
I really hope for you. How amazing that would be.
Yeah, it was a very cute video.
Yeah.
I like the idea of keeping somebody alive by documenting and archiving their experiences. That to me is the best form of memory, right? Because it's a memory that's not only in your mind, it's also a memory that you create in the real world.
Beautiful.
That you have as a physical copy.
As an extension of your mind also. Or as an extension of your memory, as an extension of your senses about perceiving a certain time or a person.
Absolutely.
You can remember the scent of a person, but also archive gives you other tools to remember someone and truly be like, yes, this is who they were, right?
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, these are all my notes.
Wow, well, that was quite the journey.
Yeah.
we have reached the end of today's chapter study, and therefore the end of the episode as well. This is going to be a long one, because we've been recording for 2 hours already. We just had so much to say.
I mean, it was a pleasure.
It was a complete pleasure. And before we go, actually, really quickly, I wanted to ask you 2 questions, my dear Maius.
Bring it on. I'm ready for both.
Okay. So my first question is, in what ways can you bring or have you brought more healing into your life or into somebody else's life?
Very interesting question. I always share my progress in healing with my loved ones. That's something I do by default. When I find out something that can lead me towards further healing, I always share it with good friends or with my sister, even with my parents as well, hoping that they could also benefit from that. So that's something I definitely do. Oh my god, I had to bring so many means of healing into my life. Let me think. I think definitely retaining a connection to my creativity and even deciding that as what I will do mainly in my life has been a very healing decision for me, because throughout those years that I survived very consistent and intense bullying, like 7 years of that or something, when I look back on it, the happiness and joy I see is at times that I was dealing with creative passion that I felt on making those books and stories, and the moments that I connected with my own creativity literally saved my life, and that was a healing that I carried with me. I'm so glad that by choice and by coincidence somehow I managed to make it the main practice of my life. The backbone of my life is my connection to my creativity, and that's really healing for me.
Wow, that's really beautiful.
What about you? I'm really curious what you can share with us, because maybe it can be really useful for me and even our listeners as well.
Yeah, well, I think I brought a lot more healing into my life in the past few years by practicing to not be afraid anymore of who I am and how the world would receive this person. It's a practice of every single day. For me, who has a lot of anxiety and social anxiety as well, it can be a practice of every single hour or every single minute.
Yeah.
One of the ways I've done that was to kind of challenge myself by embarking on different journeys that were so new to me. For example, making my own film this year was a huge step into not being afraid of who I am, and that also brought more trust in myself and what I'm capable of, and that was extremely healing to me. Challenging myself gently, but challenging enough that I can see and feel immediate satisfaction when I cross that self-imposed limit of fear. And I feel so proud of myself, and feeling proud of myself is a feeling that is very healing to me.
Yes, definitely. I'm so happy to hear that.
Thank you. My final question for you, which is the lighthearted one, is if you could shapeshift into anything, any form, any kind of being, what would you choose?
I would shapeshift into a body that literally gives me magical powers. I would create this organ within my system of organs that would give me magical powers.
That's so cool. What kind of powers?
Any. That would have its own study, that would have its own methods, that I would have to discover it, that I would have to go deeper into it and experiment with it and discover that mysterious thing within myself.
Yes. Fuck yeah.
And then I would create such a research and discipline around it. Oh, I would love that so much.
I love that. So you would have all the powers.
I mean, it would be such an organ that makes everything possible. Perhaps some others can argue that that's the brain and all the reality is actually our own construct, right? But I literally mean this strange, mysterious organ that allows so much possibility.
I can picture it, definitely. That is such a good answer.
What about you? I'm really curious. What would you shapeshift into?
I mean, I would shapeshift into a mermaid, to be honest.
Yes.
I'm a water baby. I'm, weirdly enough, because my sign is actually fire, but I love water. I love the ocean. I love swimming. I love just laying and floating in water. I love diving. I feel the most at peace when I'm next to the sea, when I'm near the sea. I feel my happiest there, and I'm so happy when I'm in a body of water. Even just taking a shower is such a delight for me. So I truly think I could not shapeshift into anything else but a wonderful, beautiful mermaid.
Oh, we have to make that happen. Well, I can't really transform you into a mermaid, but we have to like make a photo shoot or something, because I think you would look gorgeous as a mermaid. What do you think the color of or the texture and the color of your tail would be?
Ooh, I think it would be all almost glittery, sparkly kind of vibe with lots of teal, lots of deep purples, and a little bit of terracotta orange.
Ooh, I love that. Yeah. Beautiful. Okay, we have to make this a reality.
Yeah, for sure. Amazing. Thank you for answering my questions.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you for asking.
Of course. Well, that is it for us today, actually. That was quite the episode, quite the conversation. I really had moments of realizations and light and lots of feelings all around.
Exactly. I feel it. I feel it on my body. I feel it on my mind. And I will have to be a bit like, and then a bit think about it and feel through it. All that we talked about. It was healing, I dare say. It was beautiful.
Thank you so much, Mayas, for your presence. I had lots of fun, as usual. Yeah, I wanted to thank every single one of our listeners for joining us today. We hope to catch you again in our next episode, which will come out next Sunday. In the meantime, we wish you a wonderful day, night, evening, wherever you are, and we wish you lots of love and, of course, lots of pleasure.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Lucy.
Thank you, Mayas.
Bye-bye.
You can find us on Instagram at Soft Edges Podcast for all of the updates and teasers about what's coming up next. Our beautiful music is by the wonderful Patrick Velinga, and our gorgeous graphic design is by the amazing Yuri Sato. Thank you so much for listening.